It's time to take a new approach to finding true fulfillment in your career, health, and state of mind through insightful conversations with those who have found their professional and personal passions while achieving balance. Whether it's entrepreneurs, athletes, or healthcare professionals, we bring you real people, real growth right here on the Boost Podcast. Now, here's your host, Elena Lipson.
Hey Boost Squad, and welcome to episode 18. Elena Lipson here, and I cannot wait to introduce today's featured guest, Daronte Jones. Daronte, are you ready to join the Boost Squad?
I am. I'm excited.
Great, we're excited to have you.
So before we dive into today's episode, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Mosaic Growth Partners. Mosaic Growth Partners provides growth strategy consulting to entrepreneurs and organizations in the healthcare and older adult baby boomer market. They can help you bring a new product or service to market, identify and engage new customers and partners, or grow your market share. They also provide coaching and training. For more information, go to mosaicgrowth.com. That's mosaicgrowth.com. Now back to today's featured guest.
So Daronte just finished up his first season as the assistant defensive backs coach for the Miami Dolphins. He has had a meteoric rise in the last few years to become an NFL coach, and he's going to share what that has been like with us today. Prior to joining the Miami Dolphins, Daronte served as a defensive backs coach at the University of Wisconsin for just one season, where Wisconsin's defense ranked number 2 in the Big Ten and number 7 nationally in passing defense. And I have to mention that it really pains me to highlight that achievement, since I went to Michigan and the Badgers fans were pretty awful to me when I visited for a game back in the late 90s. But I digress. So before Daronte coached at Wisconsin, he spent 3 seasons at the University of Hawaii, where he left an assistant head coaching position in 2014. And during his time there, the Rainbow Warriors went from 85th nationally in passing defense in 2011 to the 11th best passing defense in 2012. He's also coached for several other organizations, including Montreal and the Canadian Football League, UCLA, Bowie State, and 2 Louisiana high schools. So Daronte himself was a college athlete, playing 4 seasons at Morgan State before graduating in 2001. And like me, he's from the DC area, so I always love to see one of our DMV natives having such success. So Daronte, let's just jump right in. What are the 3 things that we should know about being an NFL coach?
Like most things, it's about relationships, having relationships with the players, other staff members. You spend so much time and hours working with each other, 18, 19-hour days. So you want to be able to get along with the guys that you're working with, and then also the players, in terms of having that relationship build where, you can confide in one another, trust one another, right? It's built off of trust and honesty. Definitely hard work will be another thing that takes being an NFL coach, and some perseverance. To get to this point, it takes, a never quit mindset. You got to keep going, moving forward. You're going to have some tough times. You're going to have some adversity, and it's how you handle those adversity and those adverse situations and to get to this point. And definitely hard work. I mean, it's like you said, the hours that you put in, you're going to have to sacrifice your family time, sacrifice friends doing the things that you want to do or that everyone else around you is doing that you can't participate in because of our high demanding job.
Yep, absolutely. And I think when a lot of people think about what it's like to be a college or professional coach, it looks pretty glamorous, but you're talking here about 18 and 19-hour days. I mean, what is that like? And, are you sitting at a desk all day mapping out plays, or are you out recruiting? Like, what does that look like for you?
So it varies, at the college ranks. During the season, the schedule is pretty much the same, whether at the college ranks or in the NFL, in terms of long meetings, in terms of game plan preparations, in terms of, drawing, scouting plays, scouting reports, and things of that nature. So during the season, it's about the same. You get in about 6 a.m. and it's nonstop until about maybe 11:30 at night, maybe 12, depending on which day of the week it is. But the off season is where you kind of have that balance, because in the college world, the off season technically doesn't exist, because right after that last game, you're on the road recruiting for another 3 months and trying to, seal up those recruits. And so it's a lot of traveling, a lot of cities in 1 week. So that's time away from your family. If you have a, wife and kid or stuff like that, you're missing the softball games, you're missing the recitals and things of that nature. So that's what people have to consider. At the NFL level, right now we're just evaluating potential prospects for the draft. So we have the combine coming up this week. The hours aren't as grinding, so to speak, during the off season right now. We have the ability to have 3-day weekends, and we're a normal 8 to 5 hours right about now, So, and that's going to change naturally as we get closer to the draft. But right now you have a chance to catch your breath, have a chance to have some family time. But during the season in Atlanta, the hours it's 7 days a week, so you don't get a day off. So you're talking about from July until January, there are no days off at 18, 19 hours a day. So it's a grind, trying to have that balance. So, we have here at Miami, which was a great idea, our head coach instituted a mandatory workout for coaches. And, it's about an hour out of the day outside of your lunch break, but it's just a time for coaches to kind of step away from the office and the desk and take a breather and kind of regroup, which was a good idea, I thought. I think some guys came back rejuvenated and energized, so it was good.
Yeah, I love that. I wish more workplaces would do that, not just like athletic organizations. I think offices should do that too. We're all just sitting around at our desks and not being healthy. So I love that idea. So I don't know a whole lot about coaching. My only window into it is kind of like watching Ballers on HBO and seeing what The Rock does as an agent and seeing what some of the coaches are there. So can you talk to us a little bit about when you look at college and professional coaching, what do you see now and in the future?
Well, it's the job is becoming more and more demanding. And everyone, much like society, right, they want the wins now, right? So it's a microwave society, and you can see that in the coaching world, whereas years in the past, you could see a coaching staff be at one location, 5-6 years down the road. The organization has time to, at the college level, get their own recruits there. At the professional level, build the team through the NFL draft. And what you're seeing coaches getting fired within 1 or 2 years of being with the team. And that's because everyone wants to win. So even though when people see these contracts that some coaches have, it's a high reward, high risk type of deal. And you have to produce. We're in a production-based business. And if you don't win, no one really cares. And this is what people don't tell you about this business, right? No one cares how the team has grown, how the team has fit the culture, how, everyone is becoming a better man because of their involvement in the team. At the college ranks, at the end of the day, no one really cares about the graduation rates. And I hate to say that in terms of the people who makes the decisions, whether to hire and fire. Now from a coaching perspective, we care, right? We want to graduate young men. We want to get guys their degrees. We want to get guys into future and life after football, but we don't always have that opportunity, in the college ranks. And that's the ugly part of the business in terms of, you recruit a kid from a freshman, and you want to see him graduate and walk across that stage. And you're telling his parents that, I'm going to see so that your kid get an education and get a degree. And then, 2 years or 3 rough years, that coaching staff is gone. Another coaching staff comes in. So it takes that revolving door from the student athlete, from at this level, professional players. And that's why relationships are so important, because you have to, at the end of the day, rely on you did what's best interest for that young man, whether at the NFL level or at the collegiate level, and just hope that trust is there. So when that time comes, when a new staff comes in, you can kind of give that parent, those families what to expect in the transition. But all in all, it's a great profession in terms of the passion that you have there. Anytime you can do something that you would do for free, and make a living out of it, I think that's kind of the main definition of passion. So just in terms of a normal, work day, you kind of get in, and practice is one of the things that you kind of focus on. And how do we improve on each day? And the one thing that you want to focus on just in life, right? Winning the day. So how can we win this day? How can we get better and not comparing yourself to what another team is doing or what another university is doing? It's pretty much what you're doing as a staff, what you're doing as an organization to improve each day.
That's great. And I love that, winning the day. And you talk a lot about how there's this revolving door and how people are coming in and out this really high pressure situation. And in your career, you've moved around a lot, but for the right reasons. You seem to keep going to bigger and better organizations, but that must be a lot of pressure to have to prove results, each and every game. There's no room for kind of error and mistakes that people aren't understanding. Whereas in business, sometimes you can have like a slow quarter or, a slow period and make up for it. And you don't really get that slack in football. And so you've had to move around a lot. And what has that been like for you personally and professionally, knowing that, it's not like you're moving up in the same organization. You're constantly trying to get to the next best organization, which might be in a different city or state. So what's that like?
It's about, when I was younger, it was exciting. You're moving, you're seeing the world, you're seeing different places. But with that comes sacrifice, and I get asked this question a lot by, younger guys who wants to get into the business, who are early in the business, trying to get going and get their foot established in this business. And I ask them a lot, well, what are you willing to sacrifice? You have goals. You want to make it into this profession. You want to get to the Division I level. You want to get to the NFL level. What are you willing to sacrifice to get to that point? And oftentimes it's going to be family. If for some who don't have a family, like, I'm single, no kids. So it's easier for me to get up and leave and move from place to place at the drop of a dime. But with that comes the stress of the packing, the unpacking, right? The relocation. You're leaving people or an environment that you're used to being around. And now you have to try to move to another city. With that, it's like you go from one jungle to the next jungle. And all of that is about sacrifice, because with that, Elena, it's hard to develop relationships, right? So even though in my situation where I don't have a family, it's tough to establish a family when you're not in the one place maybe 2 years or so. And then you include the hours with that. So it can kind of wear on you a little bit in terms of your priorities. So I often tell young men who wants to get into this profession, based off of where they are now, what are you willing to sacrifice? How far are you willing to go? Because you're going to hit the brick wall. You're going to have some adversity, but you have to have some perseverance to kind of keep going and moving forward with it. So as long as they understand what they're getting themselves into, then they have a fighting chance. And what you come to find out, some guys, you never really know what you have to sacrifice until it gets to that point, and some guys will start off in the profession, but, it's going to come to that point in time where they may have an opportunity to go to another state, and they may have a wife. They may have some children in school, and they don't want to relocate. It's not that easy for a loved one to find another job in that field elsewhere, and then what you have families that, the husband's living in St. Louis and the wife is in Los Angeles and the kids, so now you have that adds a whole nother dimension to the family atmosphere. So, it's all about sacrifices, one, working hard, and then having some support, because I promise you, I wouldn't have been able to do what I've done if I didn't have the support of my loved ones, because again, the road is tough, and it's not always the glamorous lifestyle as some would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that idea of sacrifice is really important for kind of any venture that you're going through. A lot of times people don't realize how much hard work and time something is going to take and how isolating it can really be, whether you're coaching at the elite level like you are, or you're starting a business that requires a lot of your own time and a lot of focus. And so sometimes you just get into something and then you're like, oh crap, I didn't realize that I wasn't going to have time to see my wife or husband or kids. And it's a really tough call. So I think it's great that you're putting that out there and that you're kind of setting people's expectations about that. It sounds like you love what you do. So that's a choice that you've made and that you're happy with. But I imagine it's not always easy. And, one thing that I really want to hear from you more about is what are 3 tactics for how you've become an NFL coach? Because you've done that so quickly compared to how, the trajectory for most people in that field. And I'm sure some of it is just being in the right place at the right time, but I think that's not really fair to you. I'm sure a lot of it is hard work and what you've put into it to get there. So talk to us a little bit about how you've gotten to where you are today.
Wow. Probably the number one, like anything, probably faith, just trusting in faith. I believe in God. So I feel that He has placed me in different places to meet the right people, be in the right spot, and develop genuine relationships. I think people overlook that sometimes, and developing genuine relationships where people are, they help you get along, right? And they don't want anything in return. And it's kind of like lifting as we climb. So as they continue to move up in the ranks, and if you have established relationships and have maintained contact with that individual person, just for the pure knowledge of how can I get better as a coach? What are some of the things I can do to improve, and not necessarily looking for how can this guy help me in my career. And I think that's the biggest mistake, in terms of if you can't help me in my career, then I have no reason to keep a relationship with you. And you don't want to make that mistake, right? Because in this profession, there's so many levels. So for me, I was fortunate to coach at every level. I've coached high school, I've coached various divisions of college football, and now I coach in the CFL and I'm coaching the NFL. So you never know what paths you may cross in this profession, and you can't look at a high school coach and say, well, he's just in high school, he can't help me, so I don't need to establish that relationship, so you have to be respectful, you have to be humble. And what you come to find out is, for my career, Elena, the most impactful relationships that has helped me get here were the ones that I developed when I was coaching high school football in Louisiana, so the head coach in Louisiana introduced me to a young man or a guy who he was mentoring, who later became, a front office personnel director for an NFL team. So he kind of gave me some lessons, some life lessons in terms of the business aspect. When I was a young coach, also at Nicholls State University, I was able to come across with a family of mine that they kind of took me on in. You're part of the family. But with that being said, that's how I got the job here at the Dolphins. So you're talking about that foundation was laid back in 2000. Again, back then, you weren't trying to, let me latch onto this guy because he can help me in the future. It's more so I'm trying to be a better coach for where I am now and enjoy the process, not necessarily the goal. And when you focus on the goal and not the process, you lose sight of being humble. You lose sight of building relationships. But when you focus on the process and the journey that it takes, that to me was the biggest asset of my development, because you're learning from different guys, you're expanding your network. And before you know it, when you get to this stage, you're having phone calls, right? And some of the guys that you've established relationships with 10 years ago, they too have moved up in their career. So the reason why these last 5 or 6 years for me have been a huge jump were not necessarily because of what I've done now. It's because of the relationships I built years ago. So, and one thing I would tell people is, when you always have a job, you're always interviewing for your next job and you don't even know it. So don't look at it and say, my boss is not seeing the things that I'm doing, because in this profession, with so many assistant coaches, someone on each staff is going to have an opportunity to move, right? So if you're building relationships with people, not because of what you can do for me, but because I just want to build those genuine relationships to get to know you and your family and how I can be to get better as a coach. What happens is someone on that staff gets an opportunity and then they call you. And that's what happens. So kind of give you a little what happened with me. I came back to Bowie State when I was about to get out of coaching, actually. It's a crazy story. I was about to get out of coaching. I had gotten accepted into law school down at LSU. When I was leaving Louisiana, I was like, the career is not moving where I wanted to go. I had given myself a certain time. And I was like, by 26, if I don't hit anything, I'm leaving. Got accepted into law school. And then Bowie State calls, right? It was a guy who coached me in college, got the head coaching job, and said, hey, would you like to come and be my defensive coordinator? And it took me about a good month to make that decision, Elena. So, I prayed on it, took the job. I was there for some time, for 5 years, had some success. But again, the career isn't moving, right? You're kind of stagnant. You've been in one place for 5 years. You're trying to move up in the ranks. And then I actually took 2 steps back for 1 step forward, right? And a lot of folks criticized me for taking that decision, for leaving Bowie State and going to UCLA for the role that I went in. But at UCLA, made major connections. I'm at UCLA, then I go to Montreal. And while in Montreal, Hawaii had a head coaching position open, and Norm Child took the head coaching job there. And I just happened to call him for something totally different. And he asked me, he said, hey, Daronte, what do you think about coaching in Hawaii? I had no idea. I said, Coach, I don't even know who's the head coach over there. And he was like, well, I just took the job, but I want you to come with me. Now, mind you, when we worked at UCLA together, me and Coach Child, we had minimal interaction, right? Other than just, hey, Coach, how's it going? How's your family? So forth. And that's it, But the whole time he's watching how you work. He's watching the hard work that you put in, the effort that you put into what you do, the detail orientation that you have. And then that led to that job. So what happened, Elena, just the past couple of opportunities I've had has been because of relationships that I've built in the past. And you just kind of maintain those relationships, not looking for the outcome, but just because of you want to just pick their brain for whatever you can to better improve yourself. And that's what happened. So that's the explanation of the drastic jump these last 5 years.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I have a lot I want to follow up on there. So first, you talked a little bit about how when you were coaching in high school, you built these relationships there that have actually directly contributed to your role with the Miami Dolphins today. And I want to really hone in on that point. So a lot of times when you're early in your career, the people you're working for then are not the CEOs of organizations. They're not running the show, but they could be one day. And when they're at that point where they're not in those leadership roles, they actually have more time to mentor and coach you and get to know you. So it's so important to take those opportunities. Some of the people that I worked with earliest in my career are the ones that still mentor me today because I built those relationships with them early on. They saw something in me. They saw something in you that made them realize there was something special there and worth investing time in. And over time, those relationships grow. You do never know where somebody's going to end up. And that's why it's so important for those not to just be transactional relationships, that they're things where you genuinely care about the other person, just like you had mentioned before. I think it's also interesting how you talked about going from Bowie to UCLA and how people saw that as a step back. And I suspect that you didn't see it that way, that this was part of your plan, that you knew you were going to get something different out of that experience. I've had things like that in my career too, where people are surprised at certain moves that I've made, but it's always been part of a larger plan. And it's hard not to let those other voices get in your head that are like, why the hell are you doing that? Like just listening to your own gut and your own voice inside your head that knows you did something like that for a reason. The worst position to be in is like having to take a position that you don't want. But when you do it because you're choosing to go in a different direction that might not be obvious to everyone else, but you know why you're doing it, that's a great place to be, where you're intentionally carving out that path for you. And lastly, you mentioned, that someone asked you to be the coaching staff at Hawaii who you'd worked with before, but that you didn't even interact with them that much. And that kind of just proves the point that people are always watching. And so what you put out there should always be, how you want to be perceived by people, that even if you think they're not paying attention, people are watching. And you always want to bring your A game and your best self to every situation to the extent that you can, because you never know when someone's going to be watching and something that might be insignificant to you actually really makes an impression on somebody else. So really great points. Thank you for sharing that with us. So one thing I want to touch on a little bit more is this idea of how you take time for yourself and achieve some type of balance. I mean, you mentioned that have this extra hour a day to work out, which is great, and that's a huge part of it. But like, how else do you take time for yourself, particularly when the season is in full swing and you're working these like 19 and 20-hour days?
It's tough. During the season, it's really tough. So for me, it's usually road games, right? It's when you're on the road, you're traveling, you have that moment of reflection on the plane where you can just not think about football for a couple of hours, and then usually right after the games, and you kind of, you watch the film right after the game, you kind of gives you time to either calm down, right, from the game, or just whether it's excitement or just, you're upset about something. So, you have to kind of decompress and just kind of regroup. But during the season, it's only so much you can really do, in my opinion. I have not done a great job of having great balance in terms of social life or just things outside of football. And part of it is because one of the advantages I thought I've had, or I've been banking on all these years, is I don't have a wife. I don't have a kid. So there's no one on the staff that can, in my opinion, I don't know how this may come off, but there's no one on the staff who can outwork me because I don't have a wife to go home to. I don't have a kid to go home to. So there's no possible way that anyone on the staff can outwork me. Most times, the last couple of staffs, I've been the only non-married guy on the staff, so during the season, it's tough for me to find a balance, but that's something that I got to work on. And even from different head coaches have said, Daronte, you got to try to find a balance somehow. I know it's tough, but you got to find a balance. So I'm still working on that, still a work in progress. However, in the off season is where I find my balance. I travel a lot. In this coaching profession, most staffs, you get 4 to 5 weeks off in the summer. So you get like the end of June for all of July off for the most part. So I do a lot of international traveling. I love to travel internationally. So that's my way out. If I have, we get 10 days off, I'm out of the country. We get a week off, I'm out of the country. So I try to leave out of the country as much as possible because I enjoy seeing the world. And that's for me how I find my balance. I'm very family oriented. So when I can get home, I go home, So for me, the balance comes in the off season, not so much during the season. But I know I have to improve. Just it's a long career, right? So, and sometimes those seasons are long. I have to find a better way to have balance during the season.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of people feel the same way you do and might not be as self-aware to know that like that's something that they need to work on. But your tactic is interesting about how you kind of like grind for the season and then you'll have 4 or 5 weeks off in the summer. That's great too. I mean, I go through phases like that where I will go really hard for a couple weeks or a month or two straight, and then I'll just take a lot of vacation. And for me, that works too, because it gives you that time to recharge and also to kind of like let some of the ideas settle that were going around in your head, and gives you a little time to think strategically. Whereas when you're in the grind all the time, you just don't have time or energy to do that kind of thinking. So even, I mean, some professions just don't have that luxury of like having balance kind of built into them. So I think the way that you're doing it and taking those vacations every year is still really important. So I love that. So why don't we go ahead and close out with a parting piece of guidance for us?
One, faith. I think you have to believe in something. I think that's where your foundation comes from. I would say, trust your instincts, whether it's really in any career path that you may choose. A lot of times we're taught to believe on our intellect, right? And when you believe on your intellect, the instincts kind of get lost a little bit. So just trying to have that balance where, intellect can kind of get you there, but instincts can help you find whatever you're trying to find. Maybe it's that void in life. Maybe it's that, that passion sometimes. So, follow your instincts, trust your instincts. And then also just, I keep harping on relationships, building relationships. I read this book years ago. Actually, I read it maybe 15 years ago. And to this day, it's probably one of the best books I've ever read. It's a oldies but goodies, but How to Win Friends and Influence People, by Dale Carnegie. To me, that book is all about relationships. It's all about, the ability and the strength not to criticize, right? And, be aware of how others may feel in certain situations. And to me, that has helped me, especially in this profession, so, in college, a player may have a bad day. A player may be going through a bad time, but instead of getting on him for having a bad practice, trying to figure out, well, why did he have a bad practice? How are you doing in your classwork? What's going on in your personal life? What's behind you having a bad day, rather than just jumping on him? So that book to me is the foundation of me building relationships. Those would probably be the final three. I would say, relationships, trust your instincts, and then, believe in someone, believe in a higher being.
Good stuff. So Daronte's tips to win the day. So I hope today's episode inspires you to think more about how you can find your passion and live your best life. For more information, including links to resources that Daronte and I chatted about today and how best to get in touch with him, head on over to our website, theboostpodcast.com, and check out our show notes from this episode and catch the Boost bonus. Daronte, I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us today. And remember, anything is possible for you.
Now that you've completed this episode, the next step is to join the Boost Squad for strategic insights, tips, and tricks, as well as exclusive resources designed specifically to accelerate your personal and professional growth. All this and more is waiting for you at theboostpodcast.com.